friends, and welcome to Kirby Russia. Today's episode is about demonization by the mainstream media, and our big guest is Wasim Bahrani. He is a host and presenter on Press TV, aka Iranian TV. And if there's anyone who knows about being demonized, it's the Iranians.
There has to be a threat from Russia, and from an invincible threat, you can say, from Russia and from China and from Iran.
So we'll talk to Wasim pretty soon, but right now let's talk a little bit about demonization in the media. As someone who lives in Russia, I can tell you that we definitely also, like the Iranians, get a lot of demonization by the Western mainstream media. But the question is why? So the first reason is what I would call wishful thinking. There are a lot of experts, analysts, who write a lot of prognoses about the future, right? But generally, instead of writing about the future the way the evidence would lead them, they generally sort of follow their emotions and write the future that they want. This is why, since the very beginning of the Putin period, they have been writing every year articles about how Russia's collapse is imminent, it's coming, Russia will fall. And there are articles going back to the very beginning, 18 years ago when he first came into office, saying this is the year when Russia will fall. So are these people lying? No, it's just what they want to happen. They are so overwhelmed by their emotions that they sort of see that there's this or that or the other thing happening in Russia, and they weave this big story that it's going to be the end of Russia because that's what they want. It's wishful thinking writing. And wishful thinking writing, in terms of countries you consider to be your enemies, tend to turn into demonization. One of the other reasons why demonization happens is this little factor in the human brain called tribalism. In fact, I think that tribalism is really one of the most ignored factors in human existence. So I'm a big proponent that we need to acknowledge that the human mind is very tribal. And when we get into this mindset of us versus them, especially like during the Cold War, capitalism, democracy versus communism, socialism, communism. On the other side, we get in this tribal mentality that we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Our tribe versus their tribe. And that sort of tribal mentality justifies, for a lot of people, especially stupid people, lying, misleading, demonizing. And we all know that very often we tend to hate things that are sort of foreign or alien or scary to us. Now, hold on here, guys. I'm not going to turn super liberal because, liberals always say that, hate comes from fear. Well, hate also comes from love. If someone kills some random person in a country you don't know, well, that sucks. If someone kills your wife that you love, you hate them. So there's definitely some interplay between emotions. What I'm trying to say here is that when our tribalism clicks on, we all begin to demonize other groups. We tend to root for our guys and say bad things about the other guys. The thing is that we need to acknowledge this. We need to know that this is part of the human condition. Human beings also have to use the bathroom, which is a sort of ugly thing that we control and kind of hide. And with tribalism, we need to also acknowledge that we have a certain innate ugliness that needs to be dealt with. One of the more sinister sides of demonization comes when the government sort of gets maybe a little bit too involved with the media, because very often they have strategic objectives and they want to accomplish those objectives. There have been many journalists who've come forward to say that they've gotten some pretty big hints from guys in suits that they should write this way or that way or do this, that, and the other sort of reporting, or the opposite, that they made this sort of documentary piece that went against the editorial line of the company and they were gotten rid of. Very often it's a question of following the money or following the power structure. And that's where the demonization comes from. Because many people, when they become journalists, they at least want to go into this sort of profession to spread the truth or something, right? Well, unfortunately, the people who run it aren't really particularly interested in that. There's really never been an objective press. We can sort of fantasize all we want about the way things were in the past, but there's always going to be this sort of bad guys or the evil side. I mean, even within America, if you look at a left-wing publication, the right is evil. If you look at a right-wing publication, the left is evil. And all these publications and all these businesses all have their sides. The question is, though, very often when the right or left is demonized in America, it's the reasons for the demonization in the stated article or in the movie are one thing, but very often they could be financial or political or something entirely different. So there's really no getting rid of demonization. It'd be great if we could, but we're probably not going to, because I think it's impossible. Because there's always going to be people who are going to write wishful thinking articles and produce wishful thinking documentary films that are rooted somewhere in their subconscious where they want some bad thing to happen to some other group of people, and which is tribalism, and tribalism isn't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. It is definitely part of the human condition, and there's always going to be big money and big government influencing the media and using it as a weapon against their enemies to achieve their strategic objectives. So unfortunately, guys, demonization is here to stay. Should we acknowledge it? Should we say that someone's probably going to become the bad guy in our media, and we should try to think why? That would be the way to go about doing this. But unfortunately, people aren't. They're going to be naive and think that, no, our media is totally honest, and the other guy's media is full of lies. And the cycle, my friend, repeats. So anyways, let's talk to Iranian TV host and presenter Wasim Bahrani about what it's like to be demonized by the Western media in Iran. Okay, Wasim, so Russia and Iran are constantly demonized by the mainstream media. Why is this so?
The Persian Gulf monarchies and other, what you could call dictatorships in the region that have a lack of elections and are ruled by a tribe or a family. I think they control the media, essentially. As is the case in the United States, it's the deep state that controls the media and the media narrative, and it's in their favor. It's in their benefit to portray Iran in a negative way, in the same light that it's in their benefit to portray Russia and China, as we're seeing more and more, in a negative light, in a negative way, essentially to give the audience, in my opinion, one narrative, which is the US narrative, which benefits that narrative essentially being Iran being a bad player in the region, or Russia being a bad player in the region, or China being a bad player in the region, which puts some money and profits in the pockets of the US-American military-industrial complex. You have to bear in mind, Iran has never invaded a country. It doesn't pose a security threat. On the other hand, it has offered peace initiatives. The most recent one, the Hormuz Peace Initiative at the United Nations, to its allies in the region. No, not its allies, pardon me, to its regional, to the countries in the region and the kingdoms in the region, the monarchies in the region, to be more precise. And I don't see Russia as posing a threat either. The whole thing with Ukraine and the fighting in Donbass in eastern Ukraine, you had a referendum where the people in the Crimean Peninsula voted to rejoin the Russia. But now, is that worth fighting over? I don't think so. But NATO has massed its troops there. I think at the end of the, just to cut a long story short, to make this, to make it as clear as possible, because it has to be about very clearly. There has to be a threat from Russia, and from an invincible threat, you can say, from Russia and from China and from Iran. You see these three nations in the East. I think they pose, because we're seeing the US economy on the decline. It's taken a bad hit from the coronavirus. Not to say other economies haven't, but the US being, with its alleged empire, self-proclaimed empire, which I think is about to collapse anytime soon. It needs, economically, it needs to make a profit. So it poses a threat, a threat that doesn't exist eastern Ukraine, next to Russia's borders, um, for the sake of making so that the military manufacturers make some profit.
Okay, so basically, outlets like Fox News present Iran that you guys exist for the sole purpose of doing harm to America and Israel. That before you guys go to sleep, you dream of destroying the Holy Land. That's the narrative they weave about you. But in all honesty, what are Iranians actually concerned about?
One thing that we hear very often in American mainstream media, especially the Fox News and the likes, is that Iran chants death to America. Okay, that's like a popular chant in Iran, where the reality is, and that the Americans portray that as like death to the American people, whereas Iran has made it clear on numerous occasions that it means death to, or an end to America's foreign policy. You have to understand, Tim, that the United States has hundreds of military bases surrounding Iran. For what reason? To, as I said, and what many Iranian, I think, officials have said in public, and is that to serve their military interests, to serve this empire, to bring profit to their military manufacturers, instead of Iran's position to this region is one of peace, that there should be peace among its allies, but Israel is not among those. Iran supports the Palestinian resistance. It says that publicly. It's not ashamed to say that. Iran regards Israel as an apartheid entity, and the facts on the ground indicate that and show that Israel is an apartheid entity. So apart from Israel, Iran has absolutely no problem with any other, despite their harmful activities in the region, such as the war on Yemen and Saudi Arabia's spreading of Takfiri Wahhabism, an extremist ideology that is brainwashing people around the world, to young men and women to cause acts of terror in Russia, in the West. That doesn't seem to be of importance or of concern to the United States.
In the Russian media, Iran is presented as a good partner. These are people we can do business with. They're really open to dialogue. What a bunch of great guys. That's the way that you guys are presented in the Russian media, as great partners for business especially. So how is Russia presented to the Iranian public? What is your public perception of Russia in Iran?
Positively. One of the reasons for that is I think Iran and Russia share a multiple common interests. One being that they are independent and they want their countries to stay that way. The United States interferes in Russia in the same way as the United States tries to interfere in Iran. For example, you have in Russia the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is supplying energy to Germany and Europe, other European nations. The United States is against that. It wants to provide energy to Europe. So, and the same with Iran. It's put sanctions on Iran's banking sector, and sanctions on pretty much everything else, on its oil, so it doesn't send its energy resources to, for example, the East, to Russia or to China. It's a game of economy. As I said earlier, alluded to earlier, or noted earlier, that the United States is in economic decline, military decline. It can't win a war. Its foreign policy is in a mess. So, and it tries to diffuse those issues, deviate from those issues by interfering in Russia and in China. And I think China I think Iran, sorry, pardon me, in China but Russia and Iran, going back to your question, I think Iran understands this. The leadership understands this, and it's clear that Iran and Russia can forge a partnership, an alliance. I think that's going to be the future. The future may be that an alliance between Iran, Russia, Iran switching to the east and ditching the dollar, trading in their own economies. That's something that is of extreme concern to the United States, and essentially Iran and Russia want to preserve their independence. That's something that you can't deny.
Okay, so in America, we have some eternal wedge issues that are always being discussed by the public, be it abortion, guns, the medical care system. In Russia, it would definitely be the state pension fund, the situation in Ukraine, and very often the philosophical question of what is Russia? Russians are a little philosophical, like I said. So what are the big issues that Iranians actually discuss between themselves? What do you guys care about in your country?
Generally, I think the COVID, obviously, the leadership, perhaps a lack of leadership on COVID by the United States. That's something that the facts on the ground prove. It's not a disinformation campaign. The facts on the ground prove that the mishandling of the coronavirus by the U.S. President Joe Biden, U.S. President Donald Trump, the then former president, or Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who both deny that even the virus exists or blame it as like a Chinese virus. That's their mishandling has led to, like 500,000 or more deaths in both countries. I think 400,000. So, the handling of the coronavirus is something that's of major concern here in Iran, especially considering the fact that there are sanctions on the country by the United States, and the United States threatens other nations with secondary sanctions. So we've taken a big hit from COVID because of the sanctions that you got pharmaceutical companies that are afraid of sending vital medical equipment to Iran. That makes the headlines, the news. Other aspects of the news, mostly domestic.
What kind of domestic stuff?
Domestic issues, regarding the economy, regarding the politics, the political affairs. I think there's this illusion in the minds of others that Iran, is like, for example, you can't criticize the president or something, but that's not the case. The newspapers, all media outlets, you can condemn, criticize the president or put certain policies. Any public services are in the news, and the people are made aware of them, and they're either criticized or praised. So that's two. And you wanted the third one?
Yeah. If you got it.
I'm trying to think. As I said, recently the presidential elections, that's been one of the main that's been catching the headlines. We recently had elections, and we're transitioning from one government to another, and we're going to see how that unfolds.
So what were the platforms that your presidential candidates actually ran on? What was their big offer to the Iranian public?
We had 3 debates. One was, one candidate throwing insults at the other. The second was more disciplined and outlined each candidate's policies. One candidate, you got a reformist camp and a principalist camp, 2 parties. if you can call them that, two main parties in Iran. The reformist camp outlined their idea, their economic plans, their housing plans, all the same policies that you hear in the West, and I think they were outlined during the campaign. Their foreign policy, for example, the winner of the election, he's gonna, I think, take a more look at a more independent foreign policy with regards to perhaps more self-production from inside the country, as opposed to, and less reliance on the West. Try and make more engage with regional countries and regional nations.
Now, about 100 years ago, Russia had a big communist revolution, and this sent a lot of fear throughout the world, because many people were very scared that communism would spread all over the world and take over everything. And it kind of started to, especially in Asia. And the communists themselves claimed that they wanted a world revolution, so it's not too surprising. Now, the mainstream media presents your Iranian Revolution as being something similar, that you guys are just itching at the trigger to expand your ideological influence, especially to your neighbors, by sword point. So is this actually true? I mean, what was the Iranian Revolution about? And what is the spirit of your revolution? Is this some sort of ideology for export or not?
Listen, the revolution was an Islamic revolution. The ideals of the Islamic Revolution, it revived the Islamic, a peaceful Islamic coexistence with other neighboring countries. Before the revolution, Iran was dependent on the United States and other Western countries. After the revolution, Iran became independent. The ideology, if you like, of the revolution is an Islamic one, and a peaceful Islamic one, as opposed to the ideology of that Saudi Arabia exports, which is one of Wahhabism, one that brainwashes people. The picture you see behind me is the martyr Lieutenant General Qasim Soleimani, who fought terrorism in Iraq and Syria. So this ideology, if other people in the region are attracted to it, they're more than welcome to be part of this revolution, this revolutionary ideals. It's not something that is enforced on other nations by force, and this is something that other nations have said. Other people who, you see, the US tries to depict, whenever it talks about Iran, and we go back to the mainstream media, you hear the same phrase again and again and again: Iranian-backed Shia militias in Iraq, for example, or Iranian-backed Shia militias in Lebanon, pardon me. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as Iranian-backed Shia militias in Iraq. In Iraq, what there is was a US-trained army that collapsed. So, that says a lot about how the US trains other armies. It collapsed to ISIS, and Iran came to the rescue of Iraq and to the rescue of Iranian, because the army had collapsed, so you had a volunteer force. This volunteer force spearheaded the fight and liberated Iraq from ISIS. Naturally, that makes friendly ties with Iran, because Iran was the first to come to Iraq's rescue before Baghdad collapsed or Erbil collapsed in the north. The same goes with Lebanon. Iran helped Lebanon liberate its territory from Israel. So Iran has alliances in the region from on the backdrop of the revolution. Um, it would not have had these alliances had it not been for the revolution, for the Islamic Revolution. But these are not proxies. When they say U.S. Iranian-backed Shia proxies, it's an absolute lie, and that's disinformation. These are forces that get their paychecks from, like for example in Iraq, they get their paychecks from Baghdad, they get their pensions from Baghdad, they get their orders from Baghdad where to go and where to position their forces. Um, Iran, and they themselves admit and say that Iran has never once in Iraq or in Lebanon or anywhere else in Syria. They themselves say Iran has never, or the Palestinians to add to the list. Anyway, they have never once said that Iran has told us to do A, B, and C, or do this, and that. This is something that I think this is the disinformation campaign that unfortunately the US mainstream media wages.
If you could tell the world one truth about Iran, break through the mainstream media lies, and just tell everyone one truth about Iran, what would that truth be?
I would say that your governments, the United States, are making a massive error and mistake, and you will see this in the future by supporting and giving funds, military, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars of military aid to monarchies and dictatorships that have never seen a ballot box in their lives. Of military weapons to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars to wage wars on other countries, such as Yemen, the war on Yemen, or kidnap the Lebanese Prime Minister al-Hariri and make him resign in Saudi state media. They've chosen the wrong side. It's time to change their side, and the reality on the ground is that Iran has introduced many offered many olive branches. This region needs foreign forces such as the United States to leave. They don't serve the people; they serve the dictatorships and the monarchies and the tyrants that are ruling against the wishes of the people, as we saw in the Arab Spring.
All right, thank you very much. We will. Okay, everyone, that's it for today. I'd like to thank Wasim for giving us his time. So anyways, guys, thank you very much for your support, your warm messages. We're going to keep going here. Tim Kirby Russia, signing out.